Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 484th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Did you know that no matter how much or little food growing experience you have, there is one special technique that will level up your garden so that it will consistently make food that's more nutritious, delicious, and resilient than you ever imagined? I started the Urban Farm Podcast to provide you with tools that you need to be in control of your food and live a happy, healthy, resilient life. But something I can't offer you in a podcast is a live opportunity to learn from a renowned educator. If you are concerned that the industrial food system doesn't have your health and well-being in mind, well, you would be correct about that. And we invite you to sign up for this free Urban Farm U webinar with our friend and seed expert, Bill McDormand. In this webinar, you'll learn why saving seeds is your next step to supporting a healthy and vibrant lifestyle with peace of mind, knowing where your food comes from. So if you want to level up your garden, join us Tuesday, October 8th to learn how you can use seeds to take control of what you eat and feel better than ever. We'll go live at 6 p.m. Pacific, and Bill will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. Take a quick moment now to reserve your spot by signing up at ownyourseeds.com or by texting SAVE SEEDS, all one word, to 33444. That's ownyourseeds.com, or use your phone to text SAVE SEEDS to 33444 to sign up. It's totally free, and I would be so happy to see you there. Today on our podcast, we have someone who helps others understand and create food forests. We're talking with Kristie Kapp about Ecoedible landscaping. Kristie is the founder and executive director of Resilient Roots. She has a master's in ecology from Yale School of Environmental Studies and over 20 years of farming experience. She decided to merge her two professions, completed a permaculture landscape design program, and has been designing landscapes since 2014. Resilient Roots is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate and promote awareness about permaculture landscapes that are primarily edible and guided by ecological principles. They empower people to grow their own food in a manner that is sustainable and uses local resources. Welcome to the show today, Kristie. Are you ready to rock edible landscapes?
I am. Thank you.
Excellent. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Sure. I studied ecology when I was in college and in grad school, and then worked for many years as an ecologist for the state of Massachusetts. And then when my kids were young, I decided I really wanted to be home with them, so farming had also been a passion of mine, and I decided to just start doing some farming in our small little area here. And I farmed, vegetables and flowers and that sort of thing. Then about 5 years ago or so, I started to realize that permaculture was really actually the merging of the two things that I love the most, and that was ecology and farming. So I started to look into that more, and I really found that it resonated with me, the whole idea of looking to nature to understand how the ecosystem works and how we can translate that into agricultural systems.
Nice.
So that's what landed me there.
Perfect. And you've mentioned a couple of times that you were a farmer, started 20 years ago as a farmer. When you say that, what do you mean? What were you doing?
Well, we have a really small backyard, if you will, only 1.5 acres. So it was a small farm, but, I live in an area where it's fairly suburban, and so 1.5 acres is actually considered a lot. And I was just, building raised beds and growing. First, I started growing mescaline mixes, and selling them to restaurants. We live in an area where there's a lot of upscale restaurants, so growing herbs and greens and that sort of thing for them. Back then, there weren't a lot of people doing that. And so, they were willing to pay some extra money. So, I didn't make a lot, but I was able to be home with the kids and able to sort of show them how farming works and, let them to dig around in the dirt and that sort of thing. So that was important to me at the time, and that's just the way I went.
Interesting. 20 years ago. So that would have been 1999, 2000. That was the same time that I started, the same timeline that I started going back to college. I ended up getting my bachelor's and master's from 1999 to 2006. And from 1999 to 2004, I farmed my front and backyard. And I was I was raising vegetables and fruit for the local restaurants.
There's some parallels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The thing that I had discovered 10 years previous to that, though, was permaculture. And you discovered permaculture. Did you do a permaculture design course?
I did.
With who?
I did a PDC with Andrew Faust up in Vermont at Yes Tomorrow. They do a program every year.
And can you define permaculture for us?
Well, permaculture for us is we define as an art and a science, where we put combinations of plants and animals together, looking for mutual and beneficial relationships. So what we're looking for is different patterns in nature for us to emulate. And we're trying to create an ecosystem that is more than the sum of its parts. We're trying to make it better. We're trying to regenerate as opposed to just make something sustainable. So we're looking at ecosystem functions as just as important as our product. What sort of ecosystem functions can we sustain? When we're doing that, we're using things like fruits and nuts and vegetables and mushrooms and that sort of thing so that we're not only making the ecosystem better, but we're able to glean some profits or yields for ourselves at the same time, as opposed to more conventional systems, agricultural systems that basically just extract or mine in the end from the soil in order to get the fruits of their labor. We're actually trying to make the soil better and make the wildlife and the diversity of the area better.
Nice. And you distinguished the difference between sustainable and regenerative. Can you dig into that a little deeper?
Yeah, sustainable is sort of a buzzword that people use a lot, and I think it's not a bad thing to try to have a goal of being sustainable in whatever you're doing. But the thing is, it's basically sort of a less bad scenario as opposed to let's make it better. And until I really I started looking deeper into permaculture, I didn't realize that there was an opportunity to do that. I always felt like humans were sort of a plague on the earth, that no matter what, we were going to have to be, try to downsize and minimize our footprints and all. Then I discovered permaculture and sort of the concepts around that, and I realized that we can really make a very positive impact so that our footprint is really something that's a good thing to have. The bigger the footprint we have, as long as the soil that we're using is getting better and better and more productive, that's all a good thing. So that to me is what regenerative is we're making it better. We're making it so that it's more productive and so that we can actually live a better life and all the people around us can live a better life.
Yeah.
As opposed to just sustainable, where we may be using, organic implements and amendments and sprays and that sort of thing, but we're not really making it better if we're tilling the soil.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I define permaculture, and I've been defining it this way for years, the art and science of working with nature. And you just said that. So I love that.
Well, there is some art to it, I think, it's more than just the science, but...
Yeah. And the other thing that I've distinguished, and people hear me say this, and that is that I'm not a fan of sustainable. Now, do I think sustainable is a bad thing? No. But it's a stepping stone into something that is regenerative. And I heard you say that too.
Yeah.
Nice. Your company is one that's doing Ecoedible landscaping. Can you tell me what that is?
Well, really, Ecoedible landscaping is just maybe a layperson's term for permaculture. We found that the word permaculture was one that many people weren't familiar with, and we were trying to hook people that maybe were interested in this but didn't know they were interested in this.
Right.
So by saying Ecoedible landscaping, I think we tapped into a group of sort of average people that are into organic gardening and into a lot of those sort of things, eating well and nutritious foods that might not have taken a second look if we had said we're permaculturalists or we practice permaculture.
Right.
So we sort of, when you get past the the website or the workshop and you're starting to engage, you start to realize that really we use them very similarly.
Yay! Resilient roots. Tell me about that.
I realized as I was doing, I had started to create some plans for people, and I just realized that it was a thing that I was so passionate about that I really didn't want to keep it to myself. I really
Nice.
I wanted to work with other people, for one, and I wanted to spread it around. I mean, I feel like it's the concept of using nature and sort of shifting some of our ideas away from the way we grow our food conventionally, even at a larger scale. Those are all ideas that I think really need to be talked about, really need to be brought out into the open and debated. And I thought the best way to do this is just to create a nonprofit and try to get to all sorts of people, whether they have money to pay for somebody to do a plan or whether they just have, a little backyard that they want to start a garden in. And we wanted to reach out as much as possible to as many different people as we could. So that's how Resilient Roots came to be, was just sort of a little light bulb idea. Maybe we could do more with this. And I found a group of people, some friends and some friends of friends that were willing to be on the board and show up at all the workshops and stuff envelopes and put up posters and that sort of thing. And we're only a little over a year and a half old, but we've got 500 people or so that we email to let them know what we're up to, and it's really grown fast. I think that it resonates with a lot of people out there.
I'm finding that this whole notion of where your food's coming from and how it impacts our health is really waking up a lot of people.
Yes, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I think, as more and more people realize that maybe who they were relying on for their health,
Right.
maybe they shouldn't be relying on that. And, knowing where your food comes from and knowing your farmer, it definitely, in our area, has become a big deal for people to understand that and feel more comfortable that, the food that they're putting in their mouth is really nutritious, and is going to keep them healthy and make them healthy. So, no, I agree. I think the foodie movement has really brought agriculture and permaculture to a different place.
And you went with a nonprofit for the community aspect of it?
Yeah, we really felt like, although we could probably do okay just doing plans for people that have the money to pay for that, we wanted to be able to go out and look for money so that we could get grants and donations and bring it to the people that really need it the most, and those are the ones that can't afford it. So we're still working towards that, and some of the work we're going to be doing in the future is going to be working with land trusts on some of their land so that we can create demonstration gardens so that the public can come in and we can do monthly tours and try to, reach out to some of those people that, don't have the money to actually do it in their own backyard, but want to see how they could maybe, get started and do a little piece of it.
Yeah.
But we have to have public spaces to do that, and so that land trust connection has really been a new one that we've made that really seems like that's going to open the door for us to be able to do that more easily.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
So let's transition over to what is a food forest?
A food forest is a combination of plants and animals, if you will, and you typically find in a food forest that you try to include all the different layers that you might find in a natural forest. So you'll have 7 layers typically, a tall canopy layer, which may be like tall standard-sized fruit trees or nut trees, and then you'll have a layer below that, which we call the lower tree layer, and that will have your dwarf fruit trees. And then below that you might have a shrub layer, which would be something like a beach plum, blueberry, that sized plant. And then below that you'll have your herbaceous layer, maybe, a 1.5 to 2 foot layer. And then below that you'll have your ground covers, and below that the root zone where you might have some root crops. And then we also have the 7th layer, which would be the vines and climbers and those that climb up the trees. I mean, around here we often use grapes, and that we'll often just have the grapes crawling up the fruit trees. So that's sort of the structure of a food forest, and it doesn't necessarily have to be all of those layers, but that would be sort of what we would consider a complete food forest. And if we had a lot of space, we'd try to you use at least some of those in our food forest. And the things that we would have in there, as I mentioned earlier, would be like nuts and fruits and herbs. You may have some trees that you want to use for timber, like a locust tree or something, even just for posts and that sort of thing might be involved in sort of your back layer. Mm-hmm. And mushrooms might be something that you would actually include in that too. So those are all things that you could grow in a food forest. And the combinations also would include support plants, things like nitrogen fixers that would help us to fix nitrogen from the air and bring it down into the soil where the plants can use it. Mm-hmm. We call those support plants. And then also mineral accumulators, something like the comfrey plant, and even the dandelion is also a mineral accumulator. So we don't really discourage dandelions in our garden so much. But what we do is we take the leaves out of the comfrey and the dandelion, and we chop them back several times a year, right back to the ground, and then distribute those leaves around our fruits and any other plants that are right there. And that actually distributes minerals to those plants. So we don't have to go out and buy a bag of fertilizer. We're actually creating our own fertilizer right on site.
Nice.
And then the other thing that we would actually include a lot of is plants that would bring in beneficial insects. Lots of different flowers and herbs that we would bring in bring in ladybugs and other kind of beneficial insects and pollinators. And all of those plants that I've mentioned also could have other functions. For instance, we might get medicinal herbs from some of those things that are also attracting the beneficial insects. So we look for trying to create as many different functions for any particular thing that we're planting as possible and put those in a place where we can make the best use of them. Stacking functions, if you have a choice between different types of plants, you want to try to choose combinations of plants and individual plants that will provide you with as many different functions as possible. An apple tree is a good one to look at. I mean, apple tree is going to provide you with apples, obviously. It's going to provide you with potentially apple wood for, creating things if you want to. It's going to provide shade. The leaves are going to provide nutrients for anything that is down below it when they fall. So we try to look for things that are going to give us as many of those functions as possible, and that's what we call stacking functions.
Nice. And a big piece of a food forest has to be the soil. Tell me about that.
Right. Soil is really the foundation of everything that we're doing. It's the foundation of all the food that we grow. So what we're looking for in the soil is try to create a really diverse group of organisms that live down there, because that's going to support the diverse group of plants and animals that are up above it. So when we're starting our food forest, if we're sort of starting from scratch, we're oftentimes, it's been cleared and there's lawn quite often there because we're sort of in a suburban area. Mm-hmm. And so we'll start with something, a technique or a tool called sheet mulching. And sheet mulching is basically like composting in a flatter means. Instead of piling things up 3 or 4 feet tall, we're composting in sheets, if you will. And we'll start right off with some good homemade compost on the bottom that is full and rich with lots of earthworms and macroorganisms and microorganisms and all kinds of beneficial bacteria. And we'll put a nice layer of that on the bottom, and then we'll basically look at the resources that we have available to us in the area. We'll scour the stores for cardboard and put a layer of cardboard down. That'll keep the grass down and kill the grass and keep the light from entering that layer. And then we'll use leaves that maybe we, stacked up from our raking in the fall, and we're near the ocean. We'll often go and find seaweed and put a layer of seaweed on.
Yes.
Which great for the micronutrients.
Yeah.
And then for weeks in advance of our permablitzes that we do, or any of our installations, we'll be stopping by at Starbucks and getting the coffee grounds. Mm-hmm. They'll often package those up, and we'll get, many, many bags of coffee grounds and use that as a layer. If it's in the growing season, any weeds that are around, we'll include those, trying not to use too many that have gone to seed, but there's still a lot of good nutrients in those weeds, so we want to use those, just like you would put them in a compost pile. Mm-hmm. And then we top it all off with something, if we have availability for wood chips, then we'll use those, or sometimes we're, as I say, we're near the ocean, so we can get salt marsh hay, and we might top it off with that. And then wood chips, almost always wood chips on the top, because that will help to encourage the funguses that we want to encourage there.
Yeah.
They will, we want to have both a nice balance between the bacterial and the fungal organisms, and so if we, with the cardboard and the wood chips layered in there, then we're feeding everybody and keeping them all happy. So that's how we start our food forest, and that's how we start the foundation for growing all these things.
Yeah.
And then after they're getting going, every year or so, I typically in the spring will go around and just sort of sprinkle a little compost on top. And you'll find it won't take long for all those layers to break down. Like usually within a year, everything but the wood chips is pretty much broken down into a lovely sort of, crumbly, worm-infested soil. It's just perfect.
Gotta love it. There's actually a book out there called Lasagna Gardening.
Yes.
I haven't had the author yet on the podcast, and you just reminded me to reach out to them and see if I can get them. And it's essentially the same thing where you're putting down these layers. The one thing I learned today, and this is one of the reasons I love doing interviews with y'all out there, wood chips on top. I never thought to put wood chips on top. That's a brilliant move.
And also, not only is it great for the fungal growth, but it just doesn't break down as fast as other things. You'll find if you put straw on top,
yep,
which is a nice one, or even salt marsh hay, it's gone in no time, and then you're like, you're wanting to cover that up again until your plants really start filling out. You're wanting to cover that ground so that the weeds don't move in.
I'm going to do a sidestep here. If you go to healthysoilhacked.com, I have a whole video on lasagna gardening, or sheet mulching, like as we call it in permaculture. So yeah, for those of you listening out there, healthysoilhack.com. And one of the big reasons that I liked diving into permaculture is because permaculture looks at our natural system around us as a whole system and us being part of it. And one of the challenges that we're having is that we're seeing climate change. How is permaculture addressing climate change?
Well, permaculture is the perfect solution to a lot of the things we're doing wrong. Agriculture in general is exacerbating climate change. With every time the soil is tilled, carbon is being released. Every time a bag of fertilizer is used, it represents carbon that's been released in the producing of that fertilizer. Every time food is put on a truck or packaged, it all represents carbon being let off into the atmosphere and creating bigger and bigger problems. So if we can start to change the way we're growing our food and look at some of the systems that are in place to help sequester that carbon, then we're going to be a lot better off. And the systems that we're building with perennial plants that range in height and size and shape and texture are all things that are going to be able to withstand a lot of the extremes in the climate. So we're building resiliency into our systems that will be able to withstand things like longer droughts, more intense rains, hail, and the winds that we often get. Being on the coast, we really see that. There's a lot that we get times when there's just a lot more strong winds coming. And if you have a less evened aged group, more diverse structure, you're able to withstand a lot of those things. So by creating these diverse ecosystems, we're really building diversity into our system to do that.
Nice. And that's what I love about permaculture is it's building this amazing diversity and these amazing productive systems. And that's one of the things we didn't touch about earlier is what are your harvests like out of your food forests?
My food forest here at the yard is about 4 or 5 years old. A lot of the trees that I have are about that old because I started with putting mostly just the trees in. But here's where I feel like one of my failures that I could talk about. Even though we have such great production this year, we've had a really good year with the weather and the rain and all, and we have a lot of things that are producing really well. We've also had an explosion of squirrels and chipmunks and rabbits. And really, in terms of our apple crop, which started out being so prolific. I thought, I'm all ready to make the cider, because I'm going to have so many apples. Well, one by one, the squirrels have just taken them away, so no apples whatsoever this year. And the same with a lot of other things that, we're watching. They've been so prolific, but just little by little just taken away. So it's frustrating, and I know that eventually nature's going to bring things back into balance. But there are things beyond our control sometimes. For instance, we locally have something that started up a few years ago called a coyote hunt. So a lot of the coyotes have disappeared from our area, and that's probably what's having the biggest impact on the rabbit population around here.
Rabbits and squirrels.
Exactly. And also people that are using rat poisons to get rid of rodents the rats are often picked up by some of the raptors that might be around. That might also would have, the owls and the hawks and those sort of animals that would be keeping these populations in check. So, hopefully things will come back into balance, and maybe we can make some changes politically that'll help to bring those in the right direction. But, you do sort of see that, there are things that are outside of your control, and, as much as you can try, you have to look for the solutions that are within those problems and try to come up with ways that you can solve them.
As we in permaculture say, making lemonade out of lemons.
Exactly. I'm still looking for the lemonade on this one.
Ongoingly.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I like to throw at some of my listeners is, there was a moment when something happened and it moved you, maybe with somebody or something that happened, and told you, oh my gosh, this is the reason I'm doing this. Do you have one of those?
I do. I mean, I think I get them often, but in particular, once in a while you'll get a person who, when you start explaining some of these ideas, these concepts, these things that nature is doing, that they just had no idea. I had a woman who came to one of my workshops, and it was before the workshop, and I hadn't really started talking about anything yet, but she was walking around and looking at some of the things in the garden, and asking me about them, and started asking me about some of these plants, and I started explaining the mineral accumulators and nitrogen fixers, and her mouth just dropped. And she was just so amazed that, this was happening all around her, and she had no idea. Mm-hmm. And it was just, the light bulb went on, and then she turned, she came back to several more workshops, and she's going to be one of the people that were going to our house and going to be installing several different, a food forest and some other things as well.
Awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to shift on you, and you already mentioned what your failure was with the squirrels and other rodents. So what do you consider your biggest success?
I think my biggest success personally is that I found my tribe. After working by myself, doing the farming and just sort of keeping my head down and doing what worked for me and what made me happy, went out and I did my PDC when I sort of discovered the permaculture principles, and then I started to see that there were a lot of other people out there that really were nerding out as much as I was, and were just as passionate about nitrogen fixers and those sort of things. Yeah. So I mean, that's what really fed me personally and made me feel like, I found it. I found what really makes me happy. So to me, that's a big success. I think that I can look back at things that we've done over the last couple of years to bring resilient roots into focus, and those are really great. But the precursor to all that was me finding what I'm really passionate about and what I can work on for days and days, without even thinking that any time has passed, know. Yeah. And that is permaculture and moving those concepts forward, because they make so much sense to me. It's so much common sense.
I did my first permaculture design course here in Phoenix in 1991. And for me, it was this huge epiphany of, oh my gosh, there is something that I can call the way that I think. What drives you? The
importance of how we have to change our attitude and trying to keep pushing towards that, bringing people to think about these ideas and show them that if we can just stop and observe and see what nature's doing, that she's really figured it out. She knows what's going on, and that's a better way to do it than the way we're trying to force and control a system, trying to get what we want out of it, but not giving anything back. So I think just that whole attitude, that destructive attitude, and in agriculture, that I really want to change. I really want to make an impact, even if it's only in my little corner of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really what drives me and makes me keep going. And the sort of the lens that I look through every time I think about what are we going to do next.
Nice.
in terms of our organization.
Yeah, nice. And I'm going to actually do a pause in our questions for the moment and acknowledge you. I've interviewed you're almost 500 people. I think you're episode number 490 something. And
wow.
I've interviewed a lot of people that have taken permaculture courses. And I have to say, what I've learned from you in the last 35 minutes in your speaking, you have an incredible gift and an incredible grasp, both, of permaculture. Are you teaching it? Are you teaching permaculture design courses? If not, you should.
Oh, no, it's funny you asked that. We want to do a PDC next year, but I was just talking to Dave Jackie this morning to see if he might come and at least teach part of it.
Uh-huh.
I think, we want to do it. I don't feel like I have the confidence to lead one yet, but I certainly hope that we're going to be involved in one next year, and then maybe in the next couple of years I could co-teach or something. But Thank you. That's really nice of you to say.
Absolutely.
You don't always know that about yourself.
Exactly. I do a lot of teaching and a lot of interviews and that kind of stuff. And sometimes I'll walk away from the interviews. It's like, man, I know a lot. Because, it's not something you normally think about. You just do what you do, right? Right.
Yeah. And I think that's where the passion comes in.
Yeah.
You do it because you love what you're doing, not because it's a job.
Right. So if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
Well, I would say my favorite book, and the one I turn back to again and again, is Gaia's Garden.
Oh, yes.
It's by Toby Hemingway. Mm-hmm. It's a guide to home-scale permaculture. And I actually, whenever I get a new client, I give them one of these books because I feel as though it's going to lay out a lot of what they need to know in order to maintain and live happily with their permaculture installation. He just has a great way of taking all this information and making it very palatable and easy to digest for people that aren't necessarily scientists or farmers, He's just got really straightforward way of laying out concepts and making it very relatable to people.
Yeah.
So it's something I never have very far away from me. I like to read it just to read.
Nice. Well, and Toby was a good friend. He's passed away.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, a couple of years ago from
very
cancer.
Sad.
He was. We have a permaculture city class. Is one of the courses that we actually recorded with him. Yeah, and it's a 7-week online class. Plus, he's on episode 100 of the Urban Farm podcast. So.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it was a great interview. What one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, I would say for anybody that's interested in this is don't overthink it too much. Just plant something. Just start with a fruit tree and, do a little sheet mulching around that, and then add in some comfreys and some lupins and clovers and some things to attract some beneficial insects. Just give it a start and then learn as you go and make sure that you observe, watch what's going on, because that's going to be your best teacher is, Mother Nature and what she has to show us.
The number one thing in permaculture, observe. And I've heard you mention that multiple times. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Kristie.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate all that you do.
You bet. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, our website is resilientrootscapecod.org, and our email address is resilientrootscapecod@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from anybody.
You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/resilient roots. I want to share with you a problem I've grappled with for decades. How can we really know if the food that we eat supports a healthy lifestyle? Like you, I am frustrated by the unhealthy practices of the industrial farming system and want to know that I am eating the healthiest food possible. Did you know that scientists at the CDC found that 90% of Americans have pesticides or their byproducts in their bodies? I believe that nobody should have to unknowingly be exposed to pesticides and GMOs. That's why I've teamed up with my friend Bill McDormand to offer a free webinar that will empower you to know where your food comes from. You'll learn why saving seeds is your next step to support a vibrant, healthy, peaceful life. This is a live, one-time only webinar with Bill McDormand. Plus, Bill will take your questions at the end of the webinar. He has helped thousands of people just like you take control of their health and garden through seed saving. I invite you to be next by attending our free webinar on October 8th at 6 p.m. Pacific. Reserve your spot now by signing up at ownyourseeds.com or by texting SAVE SEEDS, all one word, to 33444. That's ownyourseeds.com or text SAVE SEEDS to 33444 to sign up. It's totally free, and you will leave with a newfound sense of confidence and control over your food and health. The Urban Farm Podcast is brought to you by our amazing Urban Farm team. Producer, Janice Norton. Editor, Ken Kingsborough. Associate, Katie Fiore. Social media, Renee Ferree, and hosted by me, Farmer Greg. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're at it, please rate, review, and share it with your friends. Also, consider supporting our podcast and earn bonus content and swag. Visit urbanfarmpodcast.org to find out more and see our full list of over 500 shows. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.